Hi. You're just in time, and I am so glad you're here. I just got back from my journey back to the past. Dr. Emmett Brown loaned me his DeLorean, and as soon as I hit 88 miles per hour, you remember the flux capacitor required 88 miles per hour exactly, I ended up in Jerusalem in 35 AD. Jerusalem, 35 AD, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but let me explain. Dr. Brown had added a new option for my trip, and you not only dial in the date where you want to go, but you do the location as well. And I chose to see Jerusalem in 35 AD. I wanted to see what the churches were like, and were they the same everywhere, or was there a difference, a cultural difference in the churches? And I found another little tool that Dr. Brown invented very helpful, and he called it the tongue. The tongue. I'm just so happy I had it because it allowed me to speak, and the people I'm talking to could understand in their language, and when they spoke, I understood in my language. And it certainly gave new meaning to the term speaking in tongue. So anyway, of all people, I ran into the elder James in the Jerusalem church. James, he's Jesus' brother, and he was so helpful for me. You remember him. The church in Jerusalem was mainly Jewish, and he shared early on that the church met in the temple courts, but it just wasn't very practical for a number of reasons. You can imagine. There was probably, they weren't the most popular group in the world, but they started meeting in different homes. And because of their Jewish influence, their assemblies were very influenced by the synagogue worship that they had experienced in the past. Now, you remember synagogues came about from Alexandria in Egypt. When they were, the Jews were a part of the diaspora, the scattering, and they couldn't go to the temple, so they set up the synagogue as a means to worship God, and that pattern carried over into Jerusalem when they returned, and it also then carried over into the house churches that were a part of the worship there in Jerusalem. And I got to see that, and it really it really was beneficial. That I could experience something slightly different than I was used to, maybe a little uncomfortable from what I was used to, but it was very culturally dependent. And I then moved on from this location. I didn't want to be a burden to them, so I went to my DeLorean and I dialed in and went to Ephesus in the year 56 AD. I was so happy that I had read the book, The Early Christians in Ephesus. It helped me to understand that the church originally came from the preaching of Peter on Pentecost. And a small group, a pocket of believers, went back to Ephesus, and they met there for a while, and then ultimately the Apostle John was involved, and I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but anyway, he had a great influence at Ephesus. That's where he ended up spending the remaining part of his life later on in years, but he influenced the church there in Ephesus, and it was mainly a Jewish church at this point because that's who he was working primarily with. And then he went. I was so fortunate. I don't know how it happened, but I met Timothy, and Timothy was dispatched, you recall, by Paul. And he was in Ephesus, and he spoke highly of this group that the Apostle John started. They were in complete unity with it, but Timothy was preaching, sent out by Paul, and he was focused on Gentiles. So we end up having two groups, mainly Jew and Gentile. They were united with one another, but they were meeting in home churches. Now, Timothy warned me there were two groups that you have to stay away from. You need to stay away from. One was called the Docetus. They taught that Jesus didn't come in the body. and they had changed the doctrine about the resurrection and everything, and he cautioned me, stay away from those, and also stay away from the Judaizers, the one that said you have to become a Jew first to become a Christian. And anyway, there were literally tens of thousands of believers in Ephesus, and some were influenced by the teaching of the Apostle John, and others were by Paul. Some were Jews, some were Gentiles, but they were meeting in homes because there was no place for them to assemble otherwise. The pagans certainly weren't going to give up their 25,000 seated arena, and so they met in homes, 20 to 40 at a time. And just think, though, that would take a very large home because they actually ate a meal as well there. And come to find out, Timothy told me that many of the home churches were owned by ladies. There were women who owned them. So these people, these 20 to 40 people who were assembling in the church, they were according to Timothy, they were shepherded by the owners of the house. How do you shepherd tens of thousands of people and scattered in so many different locations? Well, you care for the needs of people at the home church level. And what we view as a shepherding role, the caring for the sheep, was done by the homeowners. And that brought to mind what Jesus said to Peter as he was departing: feed my sheep, care for my flock, care for my sheep, take care of my people. And that's what was being done, only on a very small scale, many of which were done by women. And I heard the story, I read the story about Onesimus. He came in and tried to become an elder for the whole town, a bishop for the whole town of Ephesus, and that meant a lot of resistance. So anyway, I got to see an assembly as also there in Ephesus, and it reflected the culture of the pagans, because I was with Timothy, and these were Gentiles. They worshipped like they were accustomed to worshiping as pagans. So it was different and I was a little uncomfortable there too. It was different than what we do back home. But I bid farewell to Timothy, and I went on back into my DeLorean, and I made a quick stop. I wanted to stop at Bithynia in 112 AD. I wanted to stop here to learn about these servant ladies that I read about by Governor Pliny when he wrote the letter to Emperor Trajan. These servant ladies who were deacons and had the truth extracted from them by torture. They were tortured by Governor Pliny because he wasn't sure what to do with Christians, and he wasn't happy with Christians. And these servant ladies spoke to Pliny about what their worship service was like, and I wanted to confirm this. I wanted to see if that's what it was truly like, and what was their practice of worship like. And I met a lady, a young girl, in fact, who knew these two servants, and the ones after they had been put to death. And she confirmed that exactly what was said, that they were taken by Pliny, they were tortured, and they were put to death. And then I asked her, I said, I know what Governor Pliny wrote to Emperor Trajan. He said that their worship, it was on a fixed day before dawn. They sang responsively a hymn to Christ as to a God. They bound themselves by an oath not for some crime or commit fraud or theft or adultery, and that to refuse a trust, don't refuse a trust. And when it was all over, it was their custom to depart and to assemble to take of food. She asked me, how do you know that? And she became very nervous. She confirmed that that's exactly what their worship was like. But she became very nervous, and I felt sorry for her, and I said, well, okay, I won't bother you anymore. Maranatha. And I departed, and I came back, and I returned, and I met you today. I can say I learned that our brothers and sisters of the first century embraced their culture more than a set of practices to be followed. They focused on Jesus, not a pattern. How wonderful to see. And it carried out in so many different ways from just what I saw. I need to run. I'm out of